Some houses have ghosts that rattle chains in the attic, but my house is haunted by the living. I sat in the dim, stagnant silence of my living room, the air conditioner humming a low, monotonous drone that did nothing to scrub the smell of antiseptic and stale lavender from the air. This room used to be alive. It used to hold the warmth of my late wife Martha's knitting circle and the thundering, chaotic footsteps of my son, Jason, when he was a boy running in from the rain. Now it is nothing more than a waiting room for the grave, illuminated by the cold, artificial blue glow of a 75-inch screen. I am Robert, 82 years of age, a retired structural engineer who spent a lifetime calculating load-bearing capacities, ensuring that steel and concrete could hold the weight of the sky without buckling. I built bridges that spanned raging rivers and skyscrapers that scraped the clouds. Yet, as I sat paralyzed in my recliner, my hip throbbing with a dull, sickening heat from a fall that felt less like a stumble and more like a shove, I realized the bitter truth of my twilight years. I had spent 40 years inspecting the foundations of strangers, but I had failed to inspect the structural integrity of my own family. Jason and his wife Karen moved in 3 months ago. To help, they said, to take care of me. It sounded noble. It sounded like love. In reality, they moved in to wait. They are vultures circling a carcass that refuses to stop breathing. My days are a blur, a haze of orange bottles and white pills that Karen administers with a smile that is too wide, revealing too many teeth, and eyes that are as cold as a frozen lake. They installed the television on the wall 2 weeks ago, a massive black monolith of a smart TV that dominates the room. They connected it to a high-end home security system, complete with an internal camera and voice recognition. "It's for your safety, Dad," Jason had said, patting my shoulder with a hand that felt heavy and unfamiliar. "So we can check on you if you fall again. It has two-way audio." I hated the thing. It sat there like an unblinking eye, a constant reminder of my loss of privacy, my loss of autonomy. But tonight, that unblinking eye would become the only witness to a crime I couldn't have imagined in my darkest nightmares. The inciting incident arrived on a Tuesday evening, wrapped in the mundane routine of my captivity. Karen had come in at 8 o'clock sharp with her little plastic cup.
"Time for your night-night meds, Robert," she chirped, using that tone people reserve for toddlers and golden retrievers. "I'm not tired," I grumbled, my voice raspy from disuse. "Doctor says you need to sleep to heal that hip," she said, practically shoving the cup into my hand. "Oxy for the pain and the sedative to keep you under." I put the pills in my mouth. I drank the water, but I didn't swallow the sedative. I had learned weeks ago that the rest she offered was a coma-like stupor that left me groggy for days. I slid the small white tablet between my cheek and gum, swallowing only the painkiller and the water. "Good boy," she said. She took the cup and left. I waited 5 minutes, then spat the bitter pill into the tissue I kept in my pocket. I leaned my head back against the recliner, let my mouth hang open slightly, and slowed my breathing to a heavy, rhythmic rattle. I played the part of the decaying old man perfectly. The smart TV was on, displaying a rotating gallery of relaxing landscapes, waterfalls, forests, beaches that Jason had set up as a screensaver. The room was bathed in shifting hues of green and blue. The door opened. Jason and Karen walked in. They didn't whisper. They didn't tiptoe. Why would they? To them, I wasn't a father or a father-in-law. I was a piece of furniture, a dying lamp that hadn't flickered out yet. I was an object in the room, less significant than the coffee table. "I can't do this anymore, Jace," Karen hissed. Her voice wasn't the chirpy soprano she used with me. It was a guttural, angry alto. She paced in front of the TV, blocking the image of a serene mountain lake. "He smells like old medicine, and he's taking forever to—" "I know, babe," Jason replied. I heard the crack of a beer can opening, followed by a long slurp. "But you have to be patient." Karen spun around. "The loan sharks called my cell phone today, Jason, my personal cell. They said if we don't have the 50 grand by the 1st of the month, they're coming to the house." My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird in a cage of bone. Gambling debts, $50,000. I kept my eyes shut, my breathing steady, though every instinct in my body screamed at me to open my eyes and roar. "We have to wait for the competency hearing next week," Jason said, his voice dropping lower, but still audible in the quiet room. I spoke to Dr. Evans. A little donation to his golf charity,
and he's ready to sign off on the dementia diagnosis.
Once he declares the old man unfit, the power of attorney kicks in fully, Karen demanded. And then we sell the house, Jason said. This place is sitting on 2 acres of prime real estate. We get the cash, we pay off the sharks, we put him in the state facility off the highway, and we keep the rest. We're rich, babe. I lay there, listening to my only son barter my life for gambling debts. It felt like a physical blow, harder than the fall that broke my hip. I wanted to scream, to open my eyes in rage, to grab him by the collar and ask him where I went wrong, but I knew that would only speed up their timeline. If you've ever discovered that the people you raised, the people you fed and clothed and loved, are actually the wolves waiting at your door, then you know why I stayed silent. I realized in that moment that I had to be smarter than them. I had to build a trap, and I had to be the bait. I don't know if 5 days is fast enough, Karen muttered. He's resilient. Ideally, he would have broken his neck, Jason said, laughing, a cold, short sound. I did my part, Karen snapped. I greased that top step with half a bottle of cooking oil. It looked like glass. He should have tumbled all the way to the bottom. My blood ran cold. It wasn't an accident. I remembered that day. I remembered slipping. I remembered the terrifying sensation of weightlessness before my hip smashed into the banister. I thought I had just been clumsy. I thought my old legs had failed me. But no. They had tried to kill me. They had greased the step like something out of a twisted cartoon, hoping I would snap my neck so they could cash out early. They were arguing louder now. Jason was agitated. He waved his arms, gesturing wildly at the house, at the walls. "It's practically ours," he shouted. And then, the twist. The smart TV, that black monolith I hated, blinked. It was a high-end model, sensitive to motion and voice commands. It misinterpreted Jason's shouting and waving as a wake-up command for the security log interface. A small red light on the soundbar flickered on. Recording. They were too busy arguing about money and murder to notice. I watched through the tiniest slit of my eyelid as the machine they installed to imprison me began to document their crime. The little red eye stared at them, capturing every word. "We need to make sure he fails the competency test," Karen said, oblivious to the recording. "Double the sedative dose in the morning."
"Done," Jason said. "And I'll forge his signature on the transfer deed tonight, just in case he—" They detailed everything. The forgery, the bribery, the attempted murder on the stairs. It was a confessional booth, and they were shouting their sins to the digital gods. They argued for another 10 minutes before Jason finished his beer. "Let's go," he said. I can't stand looking at him. "Good night, Dad," Karen sneered at my sleeping form. They turned off the lights and left the room, confident that the vegetable in the chair had heard nothing, confident that their secret was safe in the dark. I waited. I counted the seconds. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. I waited until I heard their footsteps retreat upstairs, until I heard the heavy thud of their bedroom door closing. The house was silent again, save for the hum of the refrigerator. I opened my eyes. The pain in my hip was a screaming, white-hot agony as I shifted my weight. I bit my lip until I tasted copper to keep from crying out. I had to move. I am an engineer. I understand systems. I understand that leverage is everything. I gripped the armrests of the recliner. I pushed. My muscles trembled, atrophied and weak. But rage is a powerful fuel. I dragged myself upright, balancing on my good leg, leaning heavily on the side table. I needed that file. I reached for the remote control. My hands shook, but I forced them to steady. I navigated the menu. Home, settings, security, event log. There it was. Event 23, motion triggered, 8:42 p.m. I pressed play. The video was crystal clear, 4K resolution. The audio was perfect. There was Jason, pacing. There was Karen, confessing to the grease on the stairs. There was the plan to bribe the doctor. There was the plan to forge my signature. It was damning. It was perfect. I stared at the screen, watching the son I had taught to ride a bike discuss how to kill me to pay off a bookie.
Grief washed over me, a tidal wave of sorrow, but I shoved it back. There would be time for grief later. Now was the time for architecture. I had to build a case. I couldn't trust the cloud storage. Jason had the passwords. He could delete it remotely if he got a notification. I needed to extract it physically. I dragged myself to the landline phone on the desk. I prayed they hadn't disconnected it. I lifted the receiver. A dial tone. Thank God. I dialed the number of the only person left in my life who wasn't trying to bury me.
Frank, I rasped into the receiver, whispering in the dark. A gruff, sleepy voice answered. Frank was a retired police detective, a man made of leather and gristle, and my poker buddy for 30 years. Frank, it's Robert. Frank's voice was instantly alert. It's midnight. What's going on? I need you to come over tomorrow, I whispered, glancing at the ceiling, terrified they would hear me. Come while they're at work, around 10. Bring a thumb drive, a high-capacity one. There was a pause on the line, the silence of a man who knows the difference between a joke and a plea for life. Robert, Frank said, his voice dropping an octave. I have evidence, Frank. They tried to kill me. I'll be there at 0900, Frank said. Sit tight. I hung up. I wiped the phone down. I deleted the call from the recent log on the handset. I dragged myself back to the recliner and lowered myself into the prison of cushions. I didn't sleep that night. I watched the little red light on the TV, glowing like an ember in the dark, holding my life inside its memory chip. Frank arrived the next morning at 9:30, loud enough for the neighbors to hear, just in case. Jason had already left for work, which I now knew was probably a casino. Karen was out shopping with my credit card, likely buying the outfit she planned to wear to my funeral. Frank used the spare key I had given him years ago. He walked in, hand resting near his hip, eyes scanning the room. When he saw me, pale, unwashed, terrified, his face hardened into stone. Jesus, Bob, he muttered, kneeling beside my chair. The drive, Frank, I said, pointing to the TV. We worked quickly. Frank plugged the USB drive into the side of the TV. We copied the file. We made 3 copies. Then we watched it together on the big screen. Frank stood there, arms crossed, watching Karen describe greasing the stairs. He watched Jason laugh about the Roach Motel nursing home. Frank's knuckles turned white. He reached for his phone. I'm calling it in, Frank, said his voice, trembling with fury. We can arrest them now, Bob. Conspiracy to commit murder, elder abuse, fraud. No, I said. Frank stopped. He looked at me like I was crazy. No, Bob, did you hear them? Arresting them is too easy, I said, staring at the screen where my son's face was twisted in a greedy sneer. If we arrest them now, they get a lawyer, they get bail, they pleaded down to neglect, they claim I'm senile and imagined it. Frank asked. I said, a cold smile touching my lips for the first time in months. Fine. I want to show the world exactly how competent I am. I don't just want them in handcuffs, Frank. I want them ruined. I looked at the calendar on the wall. Saturday. My 83rd birthday is Saturday, I said. Jason has invited everyone. The family, the neighbors, even his investors, the loan sharks he's trying to impress. A premiere? Frank asked, confused. A premiere, I corrected. He's planning to show a slideshow of memories on this big, beautiful TV. I looked at Frank. I want you to help me edit the video, I said. Frank stared at me for a long moment. Then, slowly, a grin spread across his rugged face. He nodded. I'll bring the popcorn, Frank said. I looked back at the TV. The black screen reflected my face, old, tired, but unbroken. I wasn't the victim anymore. I was the architect, and I was about to bring the whole house down on their heads. They say a birthday is a celebration of life, but looking around my living room, I knew this was nothing more than a dress rehearsal for my funeral. 3 days had passed since Frank and I downloaded the evidence that would destroy my son's life, and in that time, my home had been transformed into a stage for the final act of his betrayal. It was Saturday, my 83rd birthday. The house was filled with the hum of conversation, the clinking of cheap glassware, and the suffocating scent of too many lilies, flowers Jason had bought because they were on sale, oblivious to the fact that they are the flowers of the dead. To Jason and Karen, this wasn't a party. It was a pre-funeral networking event, a chance to show off the asset they were about to liquidate to a room full of people who didn't care if I lived or died. I sat in my wheelchair in the corner of the room, dressed in my best charcoal suit. It hung loosely on my frame now, a testament to the weight I'd lost since they started drugging my food. I slumped slightly to the left, letting my mouth hang open just a fraction,
playing the part of the fading patriarch perfectly. I made sure my hands trembled whenever someone looked my way. I was a prop in their play, a piece of decaying scenery meant to elicit sympathy for the burdened children. "Happy birthday, Uncle Robert," a voice boomed too loudly. I looked up to see my nephew, David, a man I hadn't seen in 5 years.
He was holding a plate of hors d'oeuvres and looking at me with a mixture of pity and discomfort. I mumbled, blinking rapidly. "Is that—" David looked over his shoulder at Jason, shaking his head. Jason walked over, placing a hand on David's shoulder. He was wearing a navy suit that was too tight across the chest, holding a tumbler of my vintage 18-year-old scotch, the bottle I had been saving for a special occasion. I suppose selling your father down the river counts as special. "It's been hard, Dave," Jason sighed, taking a sip of my liquor. "The dementia is aggressive. Dr. Evans says it's basically rapid onset Alzheimer's, compounded by the trauma of the fall." He trailed off, looking at me with mournful eyes that hid a predator's soul. "It's time for professional care." "You're a good son for trying," David said, patting Jason on the back. "I promised Mom I'd take care of him," Jason lied, his voice thick with fake emotion. "But we have to be realistic. The house is too big. The maintenance, the taxes, it's bleeding the estate dry." I sat there, gripping the armrest of my wheelchair under the blanket I had draped over my lap. I listened to him rewrite history. I listened to him paint himself as the martyr while he drank my scotch and plotted to throw me into a state-run warehouse. I wanted to bite his hand. Instead, I let my head drool onto my shoulder. Karen appeared a moment later, a whirlwind of nervous energy and heavy makeup. She was wearing a black dress that looked more appropriate for a cocktail bar than a family gathering. She spotted a crumb of cracker on my lip, a cracker she had forced on me 5 minutes ago for the cameras. "Oh, Dad, look at you," she cooed, loud enough for Aunt Bethany to hear from the sofa. She pulled a handkerchief from her purse and wiped my mouth with an aggressive scrubbing motion that stung my skin. "You're making a mess." She turned to Aunt Bethany, flashing a tragic smile. "He's just so fragile now, Aunt Beth. We have to feed him, bathe him. It's a 24-hour job. I'm exhausted, honestly. But how can we say no?" "You're a saint, Karen," Aunt Bethany said, clutching her pearls. "We do what we must," Karen sighed. I watched her walk away, her hips swaying. She wasn't walking toward the kitchen. She was walking toward a group of 3 men standing near the patio doors. They didn't look like family.
They wore cheap, shiny suits and had the hard, hungry look of men who lend money at interest rates that break kneecaps. The loan sharks. I watched Jason join them. I saw the hushed conversation. I saw Jason gesture around the room, pointing at the crown molding, the hardwood floors, the view of the garden. He was giving them the tour. He was appraising the merchandise. $2 million easy, I heard Jason whisper as he passed by my corner again. We bulldozed the structure, split the lot. It's pure profit, Varga. The man named Varga looked at me. He had cold, dead eyes. Make sure the title is clean, Miller. He's a vegetable, Jason scoffed, looking right at me. The rage in my chest was a physical thing, a hot coal burning through the haze of my feigned senility. He won't know. That was their mistake. They assumed that because my body was broken, my mind was too. They assumed that silence was emptiness. But silence is where the best traps are built. I looked across the room to the hallway door. Frank was there. He was leaning against the frame, arms crossed over his chest, wearing his old leather jacket. He looked out of place among the suburban pretenders, like a wolf dog at a poodle show. He caught my eye. He gave a nod so subtle that if you weren't looking for it, you would have missed it. It was time. The tension in the room began to shift. The murmuring quieted down. Jason walked to the center of the room, standing in front of the massive 75-inch smart TV that dominated the wall, the very instrument of his downfall. He tapped a silver spoon against his glass of stolen scotch. Clink, clink, clink. "If everyone could gather round," Jason called out, flashing his winning smile, the one he used to charm money out of my wallet when he was a teenager. The guests shuffled forward, forming a semicircle. Karen stood next to Jason, linking her arm through his, the picture of the supportive wife. I sat in the back, the forgotten guest of honor, watching my own eulogy. "Thank you all for coming,"
Jason began, his voice dropping to a somber register. "I know this isn't exactly the party we wanted to throw. We hoped Dad would be more present for this milestone. 83 years. He looked at me with a sad, wistful expression. Dad isn't all here anymore," Jason continued, pausing for effect. "The structural engineer who built skyscrapers, he's retired in every sense of the word."
But we wanted to celebrate his life and the legacy he built in this house. He gestured to the walls I had framed with my own hands. Before we moved to the next chapter and make the difficult transition to professional care for his safety, we put together a little slideshow of memories. "That's beautiful, Jason," someone whispered. Jason smiled. He pointed the remote control at the TV. He pressed the power button. He expected a montage of old photos set to a weeping violin track, a distraction to soften the blow when he announced the house sale to the family. He expected to control the narrative. But he didn't control the input. I did. Under the blanket on my lap, my hand stopped trembling. I gripped the duplicate remote I had stashed there an hour ago. I had switched the source input to HDMI 2 10 minutes ago, where Frank had plugged in the laptop hidden behind the media console. Jason pressed play. The screen flickered to life. The 75-inch display flooded the room with light. But it wasn't a sepia-toned photo of me holding a fishing pole. It was the view from this very room, bathed in the blue light of night. The date stamp in the corner read, Tuesday, 8:42 p.m. The image was crisp, high-definition 4K. The audio boomed through the surround sound speakers, expertly equalized by Frank to cut through the silence of the party like a gunshot. On screen, Jason is pacing, beer in hand, his face twisted in a sneer. "I can't wait for the old bastard to kick it," Jason's recorded voice echoed off the vaulted ceiling, loud and clear. "The house is worth $2 million. The room gasped. It was a collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the space. A glass shattered on the floor. Aunt Bethany had dropped her sherry. Jason froze. He stood there, arms still extended, pointing the remote at the TV. He looked at the screen, then at the remote, his face draining of color until he looked like a sheet of paper. He frantically pressed buttons, stop, off, mute. But I had locked the system from my end. The infrared receiver on the TV was blocked with a piece of electrical tape Frank had applied. The only control was in my hand. On screen, Karen walks into the frame. She laughs, a cruel, ugly sound that stripped the paint off her saintly persona. Karen's voice boomed. "I thought he broke his neck. God, he's resilient. We need to up the sedative dose." Real time, Karen screamed. It was a high, piercing shriek of panic.
She yelled, looking around wildly. "It's a fake! It's deep fake! It's AI!" But the video continued. It was relentless. On screen, Jason sits on the sofa. "I'll forward his signature on the transfer deed tonight, just in case he—" On screen, Karen sneering. "And that leech Aunt Bethany better not ask for any of the china." Aunt Bethany let out a sob, covering her mouth with her hand. The investors looked at each other, their faces hardening. They realized the clean title Jason promised was a fantasy. I watched Jason. He was shaking now, violently. He looked at the TV, then he looked at me. I slowly pulled my hand out from under the blanket. I held up the remote control. I pressed the pause button. The video froze on a frame of Jason's face, twisted in greed, right next to his real face, twisted in terror. The silence was heavy, suffocating. The air conditioner hummed, sounding like a jet engine in the quiet room. I placed the remote on my lap. I gripped the wheels of my chair. "I may be old, Jason." My voice wasn't a mumble. It wasn't a whisper. It was strong, projecting from my diaphragm, the voice of a man who had directed crews of 200 men on construction sites. "And my hip may be broken," I continued, staring him down. I asked, wheeling myself forward. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I rolled to the center of the room, stopping directly in front of him. "Here is your hearing." I reached into the side pocket of my wheelchair and pulled out a thick manila folder. "This is a restraining order," I announced, throwing it at his feet. The paper splayed out on the hardwood floor. I pulled out a second document. "And this," I said, holding it up for Varga and the investors to see, "is the new deed to the house. As of this morning, I have placed this property into an irrevocable trust managed by Frank. You can't sell it. You can't borrow against it." I looked at Jason and Karen. They were small. They were pathetic. "You are trespassing," I said. Jason's shock broke.
Rage took its place. The cornered rat lashing out. His face turned purple. "You entrapped me." Jason screamed, his fists balling up. He lunged toward me, anger overriding his shame. Karen shrieked. But he didn't reach me. Frank stepped out of the shadows. He moved with a speed that defied his age.
He stepped between us, flashing a badge that, while retired, still carried the weight of 30 years on the force. His hand went to the sidearm on his hip, not drawing it, just letting Jason know it was there. "Don't even think about it, son," Frank growled. Behind Frank, the front door opened. 2 uniformed officers, who Frank had waiting on the porch, stepped inside. They had heard the screaming. They had seen the video through the window. "Jason and Karen Miller," the lead officer said, his hand resting on his cuffs. Karen wailed, backing away, knocking over a vase of lilies. "We didn't do anything." "For elder abuse," the officer listed, walking toward them. "Wire fraud, forgery, and thanks to that little movie we just watched." The room watched in stunned silence as the officers wrestled Jason's hands behind his back. The cuffs clicked, a sharp, metallic sound of justice. Jason was screaming that it was a setup, that I was crazy, that the TV was lying. Karen was sobbing, begging Aunt Bethany to help her, but Bethany just turned her back. The investors didn't stick around for the police report. Varga looked at Jason being dragged out, spat on the floor, and slipped out the patio door with his crew. I sat in my wheelchair, watching my son being hauled away. He looked back at me one last time from the doorway. His eyes were full of hate. Mine were full of pity. "Set up," he spat, before the officer shoved him through the door. The sirens faded into the distance. Slowly, the guests began to leave. They mumbled apologies to me, ashamed of their complicity, ashamed they hadn't noticed the bruises on my soul. I nodded to them, accepting that shame, but offering no absolution. An hour later, the house was quiet again. The party was over. The parasites were gone. Frank walked over to the sidebar. He picked up the bottle of 18-year-old scotch that Jason had opened. He poured 2 glasses. No ice. He walked over to me and handed me one. "To the architect," Frank said, raising his glass. "To the demo crew," I replied, clinking my glass against his. I took a sip. It burned, rich and smoky, warming the cold place in my chest where my heart used to be. It tasted like freedom. I looked up at the massive 75-inch smart TV. It was blank now, a black mirror reflecting the 2 of us. The little red light on the soundbar was finally off. "What happened?" Frank asked, gesturing to the screen. I looked at the black monolith, the machine they had bought to imprison me.
"No," I said, taking another sip of scotch and leaning back in my chair, finally able to close my eyes without fear. "I hate technology, Frank, but I think I'll keep the TV."